The late spring sun bathed Atlanta in a golden glow, its light filtering through the towering windows of Emory University's auditorium. The air was thick with the scent of fresh-cut flowers and anticipation, as graduates in crisp black gowns mingled with families in their Sunday best. The polished marble floors reflected the bustle of the post-ceremony reception, where tables draped in ivory linens held trays of sparkling cider and delicate pastries. It was a day for celebration, for pride, for new beginnings. But for Maya Johnson, the joy was tinged with a quiet tension that tightened her chest as she navigated the crowd, her diploma clutched tightly in one hand. Beside her walked James Carter, her stepfather, his presence as steady as the Georgia pines she'd grown up around. At 52, James carried himself with a quiet dignity, his deep brown skin contrasting with the pale sea of faces around them. His navy suit, bought second-hand and carefully pressed, was slightly too big in the shoulders, and his black dress shoes, though polished, bore scuffs from years of honest work. His short greying hair was neatly combed, and the tie Maya had helped him choose that morning, a simple blue stripe, sat slightly askew. There was no flash to James, no need for it. His warmth was in his eyes, in the way he glanced at Maya with unspoken pride, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Maya adjusted the gold tassel on her cap, her posture straight, but her eyes wary. At 22, she was graduating with honors in public health, a dream born in the small town of Millwood, Georgia, where she'd grown up surrounded by cotton fields and close-knit neighbors. Her black heels clicked softly against the floor, a sharp contrast to James's heavier steps. She felt the shift in the air before she saw them, her mother's family, the Thompsons, gathered near the refreshment table like a tableau of Southern wealth. Aunt Evelyn, the matriarch, stood at the center, her pearls gleaming and her linen dress pristine. Cousin Lauren, in her early 30s, clutched a glass of cider, her manicured nails catching the light. Their eyes flicked toward Maya and James, and the whispers began, sharp and deliberate, as if meant to be overheard. "Is that the help she brought?" Lauren murmured, her voice low but cutting. "I heard he's just her stepfather. Couldn't she have found someone more presentable?" Maya's stomach twisted, a familiar ache rising in her chest. She glanced at James, searching for a sign that he'd heard. But his expression remained unchanged, his gaze fixed on a banner strung across the auditorium. "Congratulations, class of 2025. His hands stayed in his pockets, his shoulders relaxed, as if the words were just background noise. But Maya knew better. She saw the slight tightening of his jaw, the faint fidgeting of his fingers. James never reacted, never gave them the satisfaction, but she knew the barbs landed. Her mother, Clara, wasn't there. Another year, another excuse. Work, distance, something vague about a conference in Savannah. The drive from Millwood to Atlanta was only 3 hours, but Clara had stayed away, leaving James to make the journey alone. He'd driven through the night, his old pickup rattling along I-75, just to be here for Maya. No complaints, no hesitation. And yet, here he was, reduced to a shadow in the eyes of the Thompsons, a man who didn't fit their polished world. Maya stayed close to James, her arm brushing his as they moved through the crowd. She wanted to snap back, to tell them that this man had been her rock when her biological father walked out, that he'd stayed up late helping her with algebra and driven her to every college tour. But she swallowed the words, forcing a tight smile as she steered James toward Dr. Ellis, her public health professor, who stood near a display of student awards. "Dr. Ellis, this is my dad." "James," Maya said, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her cheeks. She used the word dad deliberately, a quiet defiance against the whispers. James extended a hand, his smile warm but reserved. "Pleasure to meet you," Dr. Ellis said, shaking his hand firmly. "Maya's one of our brightest. You must be proud." James's eyes softened, his voice low and gravelly. More than you know. Dr. Ellis nodded, sensing the unspoken weight between them, and excused himself to greet another student. Maya glanced back at the Thompsons, catching Aunt Evelyn's raised eyebrow as she leaned toward Lauren, whispering something that made her cousin smirk. Maya's hand tightened on James's elbow, anchoring them together. She didn't trust herself to speak, not when her throat burned with the urge to cry or shout. They moved toward a quieter corner of the hall, where a table held a spread of fruit tarts and miniature quiches. The polite laughter around them felt hollow, a veneer over the undercurrent of judgment. As they passed a group of Thompson relatives, Maya caught another snippet of conversation, this one from a distant uncle. Wonder what her real father would think, seeing her with him. Maya froze, her grip on a dessert plate tightening until her knuckles paled. The words cut deeper than the others, slicing through years of buried hurt. Her biological father, Marcus, had left when she was 8, promising to come back soon with a suitcase in hand. He never did. James had stepped in, not with grand gestures, but with quiet consistency. Breakfast made, school projects fixed, nightmares soothed. She turned to James, expecting to see the same stoic mask, but his eyes were on her, soft and steady, as if he'd heard it too. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His calloused hand brushed hers, a gentle anchor. Maya nodded, blinking back the sting in her eyes. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice catching. She wasn't fine. Not when the people who should have celebrated her were tearing down the man who'd made this day possible. James didn't push. He never did. Instead, he picked up a tart and placed it on her plate, a small gesture that felt like a shield against the world. "Eat something," he said with a wink. "You've earned it." Maya forced a laugh, the sound fragile but real. She took the tart, her fingers trembling slightly, and let the moment pull her back from the edge. But the whispers lingered, a constant hum beneath the clinking glasses and polite chatter. She glanced at James, standing tall despite the weight of their stares, and felt a surge of pride mixed with anger. He didn't deserve this. Not today, not ever. As they moved toward a row of chairs near the stage, Maya's phone buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out, seeing a text from Tasha, her best friend from Millwood. "You and James got this. Don't let those snobs dim your shine." A smile tugged at Maya's lips. Tasha's words a lifeline in the sea of judgment. She typed back, quickly, trying, "Thanks for having my back." The memory of Tasha's fierce loyalty brought a flood of others, snapshots of James's quiet presence over the years. She was 10 again, standing in the Millwood Middle School parking lot, her classmates snickering, as James pulled up in his rust-streaked pickup, the passenger door groaning as it opened. The other parents drove gleaming SUVs, their clothes crisp and expensive, but James wore a mechanic's shirt, grease stains on the collar from a long shift. "Is that your uncle?" a kid had sneered. "Looks like he fixes tractors." Maya had slid into the truck, her face burning, but James had just handed her a bottle of orange soda and said, "Rough day, huh?" He didn't need her to explain. He just knew. She remembered science fairs, their tiny living room cluttered with poster boards and circuit boards, James squinting at instructions he barely understood, his high school education stretched to its limits. He'd stayed up past midnight, helping her glue graphs and test circuits, cheering louder than anyone when she won second place. She thought of the nights he'd read to her from The Color Purple, his voice halting but earnest, stumbling over words but never giving up. And the violin recitals, where her screeching notes made even the kindest parents wince. But James clapped like she'd played a symphony. Most of all, she remembered the day Marcus left. One suitcase, one vague promise, one door that never reopened. James didn't say, "I'll fix it." He didn't say, "I'm here." He just showed up. Every morning, every parent-teacher conference, every college tour, driving her across Georgia in that same rattling pickup. He'd never asked for anything, not even gratitude. He'd just stayed. Back in the auditorium, Maya's eyes burned as she looked at James, standing beside her with that same quiet strength. His suit might be faded, his shoes worn, but to her he was the most real person in the room. She slipped her hand into his, squeezing gently. "You okay?" she whispered, echoing his earlier question. James chuckled, his eyes crinkling. "You're the one in heels, Maya." "I'm just fine." She laughed despite herself, the sound cutting through the bitterness of the Thompsons' words. But the sting remained, a reminder of the divide between the man who raised her and the family who judged him. She wanted to protect him, to shield him from their cruelty, but James didn't need shielding. He never had. The reception continued, the crowd's energy shifting as the ceremony's formal portion approached. Maya and James found seats near the front, close to the stage where the university president would soon speak. The Thompsons sat a few rows back, their posture stiff, their whispers quieter now, but still present. Maya caught Lauren leaning toward Aunt Evelyn, muttering something about cleaning crew, and her blood boiled. She wanted to stand, to call them out, but James's hand on her arm stopped her, his touch a silent reminder to stay steady. As the lights dimmed and the president took the stage, Maya felt a flutter of nerves. She'd heard rumors over the past week, hints from Dr. Ellis about a special award, a cryptic email from the dean's office, but she hadn't dared assume it involved her or James. Not today, not in this world of wealth and privilege. She glanced at James, who was watching the stage with calm interest, unaware of the storm about to break. The president's voice echoed through the auditorium, warm and commanding. "Before we conclude, we have one final recognition," she said, her smile broadening. "An award we've kept under wraps, for someone whose extraordinary sacrifice and leadership have touched this community in ways we're only now beginning to understand." Maya's heart skipped, her hands tightening on the program in her lap. The Thompsons' whispers stopped, their attention shifting to the stage. James sat still, his expression unchanged, but Maya felt the air shift, heavy with something unspoken. "This individual," the president continued, "has inspired not only their child, who graduates today with honors, but countless others through their quiet work in our community. Their humility has kept them out of the spotlight, but today we make sure they're seen." A hush fell over the room, cameras poised, anticipation building. Maya's breath caught, her eyes darting to James. He shifted slightly, his brow furrowing as if sensing something. The president paused, her gaze sweeping the crowd, then landing on the back of the room. "James Carter," she said, her voice ringing with pride. The auditorium froze. Maya's mouth fell open, her heart pounding as she turned to James. His eyes widened, a rare crack in his stoic facade, as if the sound of his name in this space was impossible. The Thompsons sat rigid, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. Maya stood instinctively, her hands clapping before anyone else, tears prickling her eyes. The room erupted in applause, row by row, students and faculty rising to their feet. Only the Thompsons remained seated, their smugness shattered. James hesitated, then took a step forward, his movements slow but deliberate, as if testing the reality of the moment. Maya nodded at him, her smile trembling with pride, urging him toward the stage where a medal and a plaque awaited. The man they'd called a driver, a janitor, a nobody, was now the center of the room's awe, his quiet heroism about to be unveiled. The Emory University auditorium held its breath as James Carter's name echoed from the stage, the university president's voice carrying a weight that silenced the crowd. Maya Johnson stood near the front, her hands clapping fiercely, tears brimming in her eyes as she watched her stepfather, James, take his first hesitant step toward the spotlight. The man who had driven through the night from Millwood, Georgia, in his rattling pickup, who had endured the Thompsons' whispered jabs about his faded suit and scuffed shoes, was now the center of the room's attention. His deep brown skin caught the golden light streaming through the high windows, and for the first time that day, his quiet dignity seemed to fill the space, undeniable and unshakable. The Thompsons, Maya's mother's family, sat frozen a few rows back, their pearls and pressed linens no longer a shield for their smugness. Aunt Evelyn's manicured hand hovered over her cider glass, her lips parted in shock. Cousin Lauren, who had smirked about James's janitor vibe, stared. At the stage, her program crumpled in her lap. The whispers that had trailed James all afternoon, calling him a driver, a nobody, an outsider, had evaporated, replaced by a swelling tide of applause that rolled through the auditorium, row by row, until the entire room was on its feet. Only the Thompsons remained seated, their faces a spectrum of disbelief and discomfort. Maya's heart pounded, her chest tight with a mix of pride and astonishment. She hadn't known. No one had told her. She'd heard rumors of a special award, vague hints from Dr. Ellis and a cryptic email from the dean's office, but she'd never imagined it would be for James. Her stepfather, the man who fixed her science projects and clapped through her off-key violin recitals, stood frozen for a moment, his brows lifted as if his own name sounded foreign in this polished space. Then, urged by Maya's trembling smile and nodding encouragement, he moved forward, his step steady but unhurried, each one a quiet defiance of the judgment he'd faced. The university president, Dr. Angela Monroe, stood at the edge of the stage, her expression warm and reverent. She held a glass plaque engraved with James's name and a medal glinting under the stage lights. "Mr. Carter," she said into the microphone, her voice carrying a quiet awe, "please join us." James climbed the steps, his worn shoes soft against the polished wood. The applause grew louder, a wave of sound that seemed to lift him, though his posture remained humble, his hands clasped in front of him. Maya watched, her hands still clapping, tears spilling down her cheeks. She didn't care who saw her cry now. Not the Thompsons, not the crowd, not the professors snapping photos. This was her dad, the man who'd raised her when her biological father walked away, and he was finally being seen. Dr. Monroe placed a hand over her heart, gesturing for James to stand beside her. "Before we present this award," she said, "I want to share a story, one that's been untold for too long." The crowd quieted, chairs creaking as people leaned forward, phones slipping into pockets. Even the most distracted attendees sensed something extraordinary was coming. Maya sat, her hands trembling in her lap, her eyes fixed on James. He stood in the shadows of the stage's edge, his expression neutral, but his jaw tight, as if bracing himself for what was to come. Dr. Monroe's voice softened, but it carried through the auditorium with clarity. 10 years ago, a fire broke out at the old textile factory on the edge of Atlanta. It was late, just after the evening shift, when a faulty electrical panel sparked and spread flames through the warehouse. Workers were trapped, smoke-filled. The air and panic took over. Most people ran for safety, but one man ran toward the danger. A murmur rippled through the crowd, a few whispers of recognition. Maya's skin prickled with goosebumps, a memory stirring. She'd been 12 at the time, glued to the local news with James, watching reports of the factory fire. The headlines had called the anonymous rescuer the Atlanta Samaritan, a figure who saved lives and vanished before anyone could thank him. She glanced at James, her breath catching. Could it be? He had no training, no protective gear, no thought for his own safety, Dr. Monroe continued. This man pulled 6 workers from the burning building, carried a woman with a broken ankle to safety, and used his own jacket to shield a young man from falling debris. When firefighters arrived, he was gone, leaving no name, No trace. For years, we didn't know who he was. The auditorium was silent now, every eye on James. His hands twitched slightly, but he didn't look away from Dr. Monroe, his expression a mix of humility and unease. Maya's heart raced, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. She remembered that night, James coming home late, his mechanic's shirt singed, his face smudged with soot. He'd said it was a long day at the shop, brushing off her questions. She'd been too young to press, too young to understand. Dr. Monroe's voice grew warmer, her eyes shining. But when we traced donations made anonymously to the community health clinic that treated those victims, we found a trail. And it led us to someone standing here today. A soft gasp rose from the crowd. Someone muttered, "I remember that fire." Another whispered, "That was him?" Maya's eyes burned, her hands gripping the edge of her seat. The Thompsons sat rigid, their earlier condescension replaced by stunned silence. Lauren's face was pale, her smirk gone. Aunt Evelyn's glass trembled in her hand. "James Carter," Dr. Monroe said, her voice ringing with pride. "You are a quiet hero, a man whose actions spoke louder than words. Your courage that night saved lives, and your years of mentoring youth, volunteering at community centers, and quietly funding scholarships have changed countless others. Today, we honor you with the Emory Community Impact Award." The applause erupted again, louder this time, a thunderous wave that shook the auditorium. Maya stood, clapping so hard her palms stung, tears streaming freely now. James looked at her, his eyes softening, a small, self-conscious smile breaking through. He stepped forward as Dr. Monroe handed him the plaque and draped the medal around his neck, the crowd's cheers swelling to a standing ovation. The Thompsons didn't move. Their row was a frozen island in a sea of applause, their faces a mix of shock and shame. Maya didn't care. She was focused on James, on the man who'd been her anchor through every storm, now standing where he belonged, under the lights, seen by all. Dr. Monroe gestured to the microphone, inviting James to speak. He hesitated, his fingers brushing the plaque as if testing its reality. Then he stepped forward, clearing his throat, his gravelly voice low but steady. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, offering a small smile that drew a ripple of laughter from the crowd. "Never planned on standing up here, that's for sure." The room quieted, hanging on his words. James glanced at Maya, his eyes steady. 10 years ago, I was just heading home from work when I saw the smoke, heard the screams. I didn't think about being a hero. I just thought, if I don't help, who will? That there was a kid trapped under a beam, a woman who couldn't breathe. I did what I could, that's all. He paused, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the plaque. I never wanted recognition. Never thought what I did was special. I thought it was human. The word hung in the air, simple but profound, and the crowd stirred, some nodding, others wiping their eyes. "But if I'm proud of anything," James continued, his voice softening, "it's not that night, it's Maya." He looked at her, his eyes shining with a love that needed no title. "She's not my blood, but she's my daughter. I was there when her father left, when she needed someone to stay. I've watched her grow into the smartest, strongest person I know. Her graduating today with honors, in this room, that's my pride, that's my reason." Maya's breath hitched, her vision blurring with tears. She clapped harder, her hands trembling, as the crowd joined her, the applause swelling into a roar. Even Dr. Ellis, standing near the stage, wiped a tear from his cheek, nodding at James with respect. The Thompsons remained still, their silence louder than their earlier whispers. Lauren's eyes were glued to the floor, and Aunt Evelyn's face was tight, as if grappling with a truth she couldn't dismiss. James lowered the microphone, offering a quiet nod of gratitude before stepping back. Dr. Monroe took his hand, shaking it warmly, then turned to the crowd. Let's give another round of applause for James Carter, a true hero and an inspiration to us all. The ovation was deafening, a celebration not just of James's actions, but of the man he was, steady, selfless, unyielding in the face of judgment. Maya stood at the edge of the aisle, her smile wide and trembling, her heart so full it ached. She hadn't known about the fire, about the lives he'd saved, but she wasn't surprised. This was James, her dad, her hero, the man who showed up every day no matter what. As James descended the steps, the crowd parted for him, some reaching out to shake his hand, others offering quiet words of thanks. He moved with the same calm, stride Maya had always known, his head high but not proud, just steady. She met him at the bottom of the stage, throwing her arms around him in a hug that said everything she couldn't voice. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, her voice breaking. James chuckled softly, patting her back. "This is your day, kiddo. I'm just here for the cake." She laughed through her tears, pulling back to look at him. His eyes crinkled, his smile warm, but she saw the weight of the moment in the slight tremor of his hands. He hadn't expected this, hadn't wanted it, but he'd carried it with the same grace he brought to everything. The reception hall felt different now, the air lighter, as if James's recognition had cracked open something rigid. Attendees approached him cautiously, their earlier assumptions replaced by curiosity and respect. A young professor stopped to thank him for his community work, mentioning a scholarship James had funded that helped her students. A student from the public health program shook his hand, saying, "I grew up in a neighborhood like yours. You're an inspiration." The Thompsons, however, stayed back, their earlier bravado gone. Aunt Evelyn stood by the refreshment table, her posture stiff, her eyes avoiding James. Lauren fidgeted with her glass, her usual smirk replaced by a flush of embarrassment. Maya caught their glances, but she didn't confront them. Not now. This moment was for James, not for settling scores. Dr. Ellis approached, his face warm with admiration. "James, I had no idea," he said, shaking his hand. "Maya's lucky to have you." James nodded, his voice low. "I'm the lucky one." Maya smiled, her hand resting on James's arm as they moved back to their seats. The crowd's energy had shifted, the whispers of judgment replaced by murmurs of awe. But the Thompsons' silence lingered, a reminder of the divide that still existed. Maya knew it wouldn't vanish overnight, but for now, James's truth had drowned out their noise. As the ceremony wound down, Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Tasha. "Told you he's a legend." "You okay?" Maya typed back quickly, her fingers steady despite the emotions swirling within her. "Better than okay. He's everything." The reception continued, but Maya and James stayed close, their bond a quiet anchor in the shifting crowd. She knew the real test would come later, when they faced the Thompsons, when they returned to Millwood, when the spotlight faded. But for now, she let herself bask in the moment, in the pride of seeing James recognized not just as her dad, but as the hero he'd always been. The Emory University auditorium hummed with a new energy as the graduation reception drew to a close, the late spring sun casting long shadows across the marble floors. Maya Johnson stood beside her stepfather, James Carter, her arm looped through his, her black gown slightly rumpled from the day's emotions. The glass plaque in James's hand caught the light, its engraved words, Emory Community Impact Award, a quiet testament to the heroism revealed just hours ago. The crowd had shifted, their earlier whispers of judgment replaced by nods of respect and murmured apologies. But for Maya, the moment was more than a public victory. It was a private affirmation of the man who'd raised her, the man who'd been her hero long before the world knew his name. James, still in his faded navy suit and scuffed shoes, stood with his usual calm, his deep brown eyes scanning the room with a mix of humility and quiet pride. The medal around his neck glinted softly, a symbol of the lives he'd saved during the Atlanta factory fire 10 years ago, and the countless others he'd touched through his community work. Maya's heart swelled as she looked at him, her tears from the ceremony now dried, but the weight of her pride still heavy in her chest. She hadn't known about the fire, about the anonymous donations or the scholarships he'd funded, but it all made sense. This was James, her dad, the man who showed up, no matter the cost. The Thompsons, Maya's mother's family, lingered near the refreshment table, their earlier air of superiority deflated. Aunt Evelyn, the matriarch, clutched her pearls, her posture stiff but her eyes avoiding James. Cousin Lauren, who had mocked James's janitor vibe, stood with her arms crossed, her face flushed with embarrassment. The silence from their row during James's ovation had spoken louder than their earlier whispers, and now they seemed smaller, their wealth and status no match for the truth that had filled the auditorium. Maya felt a tug of satisfaction but no urge to gloat. This wasn't about proving them wrong, it was about celebrating James, about honoring the man who'd been her rock since her biological father walked out. She squeezed his arm, drawing a small smile from him. "Ready to head out?" she asked. Her voice soft but steady. James chuckled, his gravelly voice warm. "Soon, kiddo. Let's enjoy the moment a bit longer." The crowd began to thin, families heading to restaurants or posing for photos outside, but many lingered around James, drawn by the story Dr. Monroe had shared. A young woman from the public health program approached, her eyes bright with admiration. "Mr. Carter, I'm from a neighborhood like Millwood," she said, shaking his hand. "Your scholarship helped me get here. Thank you." James's smile widened, though he looked slightly uncomfortable with the praise. "Just doing what I can," he said. "Keep working hard, all right?" She nodded, her gratitude unspoken but clear, and moved on. Others followed. A professor thanking James for mentoring local youth, a parent whose child had benefited from his tutoring at the community center. Each interaction chipped away at the isolation Maya had felt earlier, replacing it with a sense of community she hadn't expected in this polished space. Dr. Ellis, Maya's public health professor, stopped by, his face warm with respect. "James, you're a rare man," he said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Maya's success makes sense now, seeing where she gets her grit." James shook his head, deflecting the compliment. "She's the one who did the work. I just cheered her on." Maya smiled, her hand still on James's arm. "He did more than cheer," she said, her voice firm. "He's the reason I'm here." Dr. Ellis nodded, sensing the depth of their bond, and excused himself. As he left, Maya caught Aunt Evelyn approaching, her steps hesitant, her usual confidence replaced by an awkward stiffness. Lauren trailed behind, her eyes fixed on the floor, her earlier smirk nowhere in sight. "James," Aunt Evelyn began, her voice tight. "We didn't realize about the fire, the award. It's impressive." The words were stilted, more obligation than sincerity, but James met her gaze with his usual calm. "Appreciate that," he said, his tone neutral but not cold. "Didn't do it for recognition, though." Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line, as if unsure how to respond to his humility. Lauren shifted uncomfortably, then mumbled, "I didn't know about any of it." James looked at her, his eyes steady but kind. "You didn't ask," he said simply, no trace of malice in his voice, just truth. Lauren's flush deepened, and she nodded, her gaze dropping again. Evelyn cleared her throat, grasping for control. "Well, it's a big day for Maya," she said, redirecting the conversation. "We're proud of her, of course." Maya felt a spark of irritation but held her tongue. This wasn't the time for confrontation. She nodded politely, then turned to James. "Let's get some air," she said, guiding him toward the auditorium's exit. Outside, the Atlanta evening was warm, the sky streaked with pink and gold. The campus buzzed with graduates and families, their laughter mingling with the hum of cicadas. Maya and James found a bench under a sprawling oak, the plaque resting between them. Maya took a deep breath, the weight of the day settling into a quiet gratitude. "I didn't know," she said softly, her eyes on the plaque. "About the fire. Why didn't you tell me?" James leaned back, his hands clasped over his knee. "Didn't seem worth mentioning," he said. "It was one night, a long time ago. I was just glad everyone got out okay." Maya shook her head, a mix of awe and frustration. "You saved 6 people, Dad. You carried someone out. That's not just one night." He chuckled, his eyes crinkling. "You're making it sound bigger than it was. I just did what needed doing." She turned to him, her voice earnest. "That's what makes it big. You didn't think twice. You just helped. And all the other stuff, the tutoring, the scholarships, you never told anyone." James shrugged, his gaze drifting to the horizon. "Folks don't need to know everything. I did it because it felt right. Because someone helped me once, way back when, and I wanted to pass it on." Maya's throat tightened, memories flooding back. She thought of the nights James had stayed up with her, helping with homework despite his own long shifts at the mechanic shop, the way he'd fixed her bike, her science fair volcano, her broken heart after her first breakup. He'd never asked for thanks, never sought the spotlight. He'd just stayed. "You're my hero," she said, her voice breaking. "Not because of the fire or the award, because of you, every day." James looked at her, his eyes softening. "You're mine. Kiddo, always have been." They sat in silence for a moment, the world moving around them, but their bond a quiet anchor. Maya's phone buzzed, a text from Tasha. "Saw the live stream? James is a legend. You holding up?" Maya smiled, typing back, "Couldn't be prouder. Thanks for being you." As the sun dipped lower, Maya and James returned to the reception hall for the final moments of the event. The crowd had dwindled, but the atmosphere felt different, lighter, as if James's story had cracked open something rigid. A few Thompsons lingered, their earlier arrogance replaced by unease. Aunt Evelyn approached again, this time alone, her expression softer but still guarded. "Maya, James," she said, her voice hesitant. "I owe you an apology. We misjudged. I didn't know your story, James, and I should have." James nodded, his response simple. "Appreciated, let's move forward." Maya watched, a flicker of hope stirring. It wasn't a full reckoning, but it was a start. She knew the Thompsons' biases wouldn't vanish overnight, but James's truth had planted a seed, one that might grow with time. As the reception ended, Maya and James headed to his pickup, parked in a lot filled with sleek SUVs. The truck's rust-streaked door groaned as Maya climbed in, a familiar sound that felt like home. James slid into the driver's seat, the plaque and medal resting on the dashboard, glinting in the fading light. "Ready to head back to Millwood?" he asked, starting the engine. Maya nodded, her smile wide. "Yeah, but first, we're getting cake, your kind, chocolate with extra frosting." James laughed, the sound deep and warm. "Deal." The drive home was quiet, the Georgia countryside rolling past in a blur of green and gold. Maya leaned against the window, her thoughts drifting to the day's events. She thought of the Thompsons' stunned faces, of the crowd's applause, of James's steady presence through it all. But most of all, she thought of the future, of her new job at a public health nonprofit, of the community she wanted to build, inspired by the man beside her. When they reached Millwood, the small house on Oak Street was dark, its porch light flickering. Maya carried the plaque inside, James following with a bakery box of chocolate cake. The living room was cluttered with memories, photos of Maya's school days, a violin case gathering dust, a toolbox James used for her science projects. She paused by the refrigerator, where a crayon drawing from third grade hung, its edges curled, labelled, "My Hero, James." With care, Maya removed the drawing, tucking it into a memory box on the shelf. Then she placed a new photo in its spot, a glossy print from the ceremony. James on stage, the medal around his neck, the spotlight on his face. She stepped back, her eyes shining. "You didn't have to do that," James said, standing behind her, his voice soft. "I know," Maya replied, turning to him. "But I wanted the world to see what I've always seen." They sat at the kitchen table, sharing slices of cake, the silence between them warm and full. Outside, the town was quiet. The hum of crickets and distant laughter, a familiar soundtrack. Maya looked at James, his calloused hands holding a fork, his face lit by the soft glow of the kitchen light. He wasn't just the man who'd saved lives or funded scholarships. He was the man who'd stayed, who'd loved her through every doubt and triumph, who'd shown her what integrity looked like. As they finished, Maya stood, clearing the plates. "What's next for you, Dad?" she asked, her voice light but curious. "You're a big deal now." James chuckled, shaking his head. "Same as always. Fix cars, help folks when I can, maybe tutor a few more kids if they'll have me." Maya smiled, her heart full. "They'll have you. They always will." The next morning, news of James's award spread through Millwood, the local paper running a front-page story. Local mechanic honored as Atlanta hero. Neighbors stopped by, bringing casseroles and congratulations, their pride a stark contrast to the Thompsons' judgment. Tasha swung by, hugging James so tightly he laughed, saying, "You're gonna break me, girl." The community center where James volunteered announced a new program in his name, a mentorship initiative for at-risk youth funded by donations inspired by his story. Maya joined the effort, using her public health expertise to connect kids with resources, her work a tribute to the man who'd taught her to give back. Weeks later, Maya stood before a small crowd at the community center, launching the program. James sat in the front row, his suit still faded, but his smile bright. "This isn't about me," Maya said, her voice clear. "It's about the people who show up, who choose to help, who stay when it's hard. People like my dad." The applause was warm, the room filled with faces from Millwood, neighbors, friends, kids James had tutored. Maya looked at him, her eyes shining, and saw the same quiet pride she'd seen at her graduation. He didn't need the spotlight, but he'd earned it, and she'd make sure it stayed on him. As the event ended, a young boy approached James, clutching a notebook. "Can you help me with my math?" he asked, his voice shy. James grinned, pulling up a chair. "Let's see what you've got." Maya watched, her heart swelling. This was her dad, hero, mentor, father, not by blood, but by choice. She pulled out her phone, snapping a photo of the moment, knowing it would be on her fridge soon, right beside the one from the stage. Back home. The house was quiet, sunlight streaming through the windows. She stood before the fridge, the new photo joined by others. James with her at prom, at the community center, now on stage. She thought of the Thompsons, who'd sent a formal apology letter but hadn't visited. Their absence was their loss, not hers. The real family was here, in the laughter echoing from the living room, in the love that needed no title. Maya stepped outside, the Georgia air warm and alive. She looked at the horizon, thinking of her future, her work, her community, her dreams. But she knew one thing for certain. Wherever she went, she'd carry James's lessons. Stay, help, love, no matter the cost. "Who's your hero?" she whispered to the open air, a challenge to the world. Find them, honor them, tell their story. The town seemed to listen to, its quiet streets full of possibility. Maya smiled, her steps light, ready to build a future on the foundation of a man who'd shown her what greatness truly was.